Hi, my name's Steve Salt. I'm a Derbyshire boy, and what brings me to the Isle of Man is a lifetime of interest in motorcycling, an active motorcyclist to this day. First came over here to the TT in 1981, and it was a lot different place, I can assure you, in 1981. And that was a social visit. I came over on a motorcycle, and my career sort of took off from there from a marketing perspective. I actually got to work in marketing, and that sort of took us right up to the 90s, where I got more involved with the TT from a business and more of a personal perspective.
And you ended up working with quite a notable person in these circles.
I did, yes. I came back over here on business in 1991, and I was very fortunate to be working for the Wrangler brand. And anybody out there that knows of the Wrangler jeans, that it was classed in those days of probably the biker's jean. They'd been involved with motorsport for quite a long time. They'd sponsored a series called the Yamaha Pro-Am series in the late 80s, which is actually a bit of a legacy of a series, because it's gone down in history with probably one of the best made series that they ever put together. It was basically a Pro-Am series, so you got professional racers and amateur racers all on the same motorcycles, which was a Yamaha 350 LC, and it toured around all the circuits of the UK, and it was carnage, basically. Absolute carnage. But it was great television viewing. They've got people like Barry Sheen commentating on it, and it's still talked about today, all these years on. And I was very lucky that the person, my sort of thought leader, you'd put it that way, was my senior manager, and he was responsible for that series. So Wrangler was very much involved from a very early stage in motorcycling. So that brought us to me as a marketing representative coming over here in 1991. That was the year that a certain Mr. Steve Hislop was riding the new RC45 Honda. And I got to meet Steve in WH Smith here in Douglas, and we chatted, which I'm quite good at, and we built a great business relationship. And it went on that Wrangler's involvement then secured Steve for the following year. It was a personal sponsorship deal for Steve that he was very grateful for the 1992, and which we'll probably go into in a bit more detail with the famous senior win. So yeah, for a guy that was passionate about motorcycle racing and the TT, I actually got the pleasure of at some point actually being paid for, drinking in the Palace Hotel and drinking in the Pit Stop nightclub. And it was just a great era, and it was just great to meet Steve and build that, not just a business relationship, but a long-term, a long-life personal relationship with, obviously after his sad passing, but I'm still in contact with his members of his family to this day.
So yeah, you became good pals with him, really, didn't you? Just tell us a bit about him for those that didn't know him.
Yeah, I think it's been, from my side, I think it's been spoke about a lot that Steve could be quite difficult to me. Whether our personalities was very similar, I do not know, but to me, I didn't see that. So I'd like to put that one to bed from my side. He was very professional. He was, what you saw with Steve is what you got. And I came over not just for TT time. We became lifelong friends up until, like I say, up until his passing. Visiting him here when he lived up on Harbour Road in Onchan. And then obviously as time went on, he moved, but I still came over, not just for the TT, but as the years went on, I came over to see him over here. So it built a lifelong sort of friendship with Steve. And I remember his sons, Aaron and Connor, being born. So it went from, it just shows you that it's great from a business perspective, but Steve and I, it grew to be a very personal and relationship. Not, like I say, not just with him, but with his family, right to this day.
But that must have given you, as a fan previous to this, that must have given you a really interesting perspective on the TT, having that inside knowledge and being that close to one of the top racers of his time.
It was, and I think with Steve, I just found him so appreciative. It wasn't a full team sponsorship, it was personal sponsorship for Steve, but he couldn't be more grateful. I think he realised that I was then still a fresh-faced marketing representative, and I had to be very influential with my senior management team back with the Wrangler brand, because obviously they didn't know of Steve. It was me that knew of Steve, so it was for me to shout Steve's corner in a way. And I think that's something right up until his passing that he always remembered and was very grateful for. I think with me, it wasn't, and I think this is something now that continues in motorcycle sport in general. For me, it wasn't just all about the winning, but it was about the person and the personality. And I saw that in Steve from 91. He was very personal. He had time for his fans. And I think for a large brand like Wrangler, that was, I suppose nowadays you'd call them influencers. But for Steve and the brand, it was a perfect sort of partnership, because, yeah, to win is great, but for the brand and for myself, it was more about the person as well.
And for that sort of sponsorship then, did you have to get involved in some pretty interesting events and things for Wrangler?
Oh, yeah. 1992, and anybody listening to this, and hopefully this will create great dialogue. Everybody will know that Douglas Prom was a different place in 1992. There was various shenanigans going on down on the prom. And there was various nightlife that was happening down on the prom and in various establishments, and I'm not going to mention. So for me, and knowing Steve, and Steve word of, he would come and meet me, and we'd stand at the bar and have a drink. So it was all about a very different time, but probably in a way a lot more of a relaxed time. What I see now of the event is fantastic. It's a lot more commercial, and let's be honest, probably a lot more professional from a safety perspective. But then it was like party time and festival time all rolled into one. Steve, it was back, I remember, and I have still images to this day of the famous rotary Norton being prepared in a garage here in Douglas. I'll be polite and call it a garage. We did nickname it the Dungeon because it was so dark. So that's when the bikes was prepared, not necessarily always in the paddock. They was prepared in various places, various garages around Douglas. And so that was 92. Also in 94, I remember Steve was on the RC45, and again a share in the garage with a certain Philip McCallan, and they was teammates together. So all of a sudden it was great. This was like, here's a guy that loves motorcycling. I'd done some club racing back in the 80s, but now I was mixing with my heroes, and I was getting paid for it.
What an amazing story.
How it came about, Steve contacted me very early in 92 to see if the Wrangler brand would be interested in his sponsorship. And how that started, Steve would obviously put a proposal together, and we took that and looked at it. And very quickly, we decided that it was right for the brand, and Steve was obviously the right person for the brand. So we said yes, and at the time, I believe Steve was contracted to ride a Yamaha. And certain things happened. I'm sure there's lots of people out there that will remember this, but the Yamaha thing didn't work. It fell through. And at very last minute, Steve was offered the ride on the Norton. And I always remember Steve being very, not suspicious, what's the word? A little concerned is probably more of a word, that it was probably a little untried and untested for himself. And he was Yeah, a little bit worried on the sponsorship side that he'd signed a contract for Yamaha and it wasn't a Yamaha. We wasn't. That was not an issue from our side. It was all about what Steve, like I say, it was more about the PR and the person rather than the actual machine. So as we all know, things developed. I think Steve had a little bit of a practice on it at Alton Park, but it was in the wet, and I think he got a couple of laps before this thing ceased. I then came over, so that took us right up to the pro. I came over and during practice week of that year and met Steve, and yeah, the bike certainly needed a lot of work before race week commenced. And I was visiting I was also on other Wrangler duties up in Ramsey. We used to support our retailers over here really well. There was a store up there, I think it was called Mister's Menswear, and Steve had done an autograph signing in there previous. And so I sort of based myself up there, and it was the Saturday, which would have then been called the Formula One race. And as we all know, I waited with bated breath up up at Ramsey, and this was the race that Steve had an issue where they decided to take the front mudguard off, and this was the battle, one of the battles that sort of started the history behind the senior that was coming on the Friday. So he was in battle with, obviously, I think Philip was involved, and obviously a certain Mr. Fogarty was up there, and Cole's bike broke up on the mountain. And Steve's bike, they had heating issues. The thing used to overheat, so they decided on that Saturday to remove the front mudguard. And Steve still got a very decent result, and Cole's bike broke, and I think this was sort of a recipe for what was to come on the following Friday. The warm-up to that was quite relaxed. I remember we'd all been out over at the Empress Hotel with the late Barry Simmons. Barry was the team manager, and a lot of the tech guys, a lot of the technicians. And we'd had a great meal. And I remember Steve and his partner and myself being sort of quite relaxed about it. And nobody really knew what was to come and what would happen and what would, let's be honest, go down in Isle of Man TT history. And I think the race was the best race ever in the history of the TT. So to be involved with that, it was just fantastic. And I watched the race. I believe I was at the bottom of Bray Hill. And even to this day, the sound of that Norton hitting the bottom of Bray Hill was a sight to behold. So something that will stay with me for a very, very, very long time.
Oh, it's like nothing else, the sound of a Norton, isn't it? It's just extraordinary. So when you think of that day itself, what is your kind of lasting image and lasting memory?
Great weather, being very nervous, and having one hell of a hangover the following day.
You're absolutely right. It has been described as one of the greatest Isle of Man wins, the 1992 senior. So described as a fairy tale, writ real is how it's described here on that note. And why do you think it's described as a fairy tale?
I think it was just I think it was the David and Goliath thing. We know that Carl was on the Loctite Yamaha, and it was, I know he went on later to say, and obviously the thing was falling to bits, but it was a fairly proven bike. With Steve, he'd not really had any testing time on the Norton. I think on one case, to quote the late Barry Simmons, he won on a bike made in a shed in Birmingham. So I think it was this David and Goliath a challenge where we knew Steve's absolutely expertise around the TT, and obviously Cole's as well. But I think in our heart of hearts, nobody really knew that the bike that was built in a shed in Birmingham was going to meet quite, a very focused Cole Fogarty on that day, but he did, and the rest is history, as they say.
And not just for Steve, but it did great things for Norton as well, didn't it?
It did, yeah. unfortunately, a few later years, as we all know, there was some, but obviously with what happened with the Norton probably 5 years ago and the factory dissolving over is not great. But the actual Norton name was sort of regenerated, if you like. I remember there was T-shirts being done and all that sort of thing, where probably that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Steve's win and putting it on the map. Even though they'd had various success on short circuits in the UK with people like Ron Haslam and Steve Spray, there'd been some, and the JPS Nortons. But to take a Norton with sponsorship from here and there and put it around the TT and win the senior, it's just, even to this day, people talk about it. And I've actually not long ago, I spoke to John McGuinness. I actually met him at a hotel near my home address. I was out with my wife, and there was and John was there, so I managed to have, and I said, look, I was with the TT and Steve and the Norton, and even John turned round, and I'll quote him more or less word for word, and he said, I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he won on that thing. So for John McGuinness to say, how did he do it? And again, if you look at the times, we talk now, and obviously with what Michael did this week, or the 135, then all those years ago, 30 odd years ago, 123s, 124s. And if we think how tyre technology, suspension, everything, brakes have moved on, I can see why John is, how did he do it? How did they do those times all those years ago? So I think it's a multitude. It's a multitude of events and the stars aligning that year. And I believe Cole's lap record lasted for 8 or 9 years after that. So I think that just shows how hard those two guys was battling it out at that time.
I mean, magic times. It really was magic times. And it's quite poignant this year, because I think Barry Simmons only actually died this year, didn't he?
He did. Yeah, he did. I was on his Facebook thing and I got to hear about it. And a good story about Barry is I was a little sort of fresh-faced in marketing, and I got over here and I was staying at the Palace Hotel, and I remember my phone ringing in '92. I'd only just checked in, and Barry being Barry, where's the team's gear? Where's the team's gear? We haven't got the team's gear. So yeah, it's a lot more professional now. And there I was in my Wrangler Jeep, driving down with all the technicians, t-shirts and jeans, and this was practice week. So I was sort of quite very laid back about it, but Barry soon got me on my toes to get myself pointing in the right direction and get down there and get the team sorted out.
What a time to be involved with this. And, obviously this is radio, this is audio, so people can't see this. If we share the video, you can. But I should really point out, your T-shirt is absolutely brilliant. Just describe what you're wearing.
Yeah, this is a T-shirt by Duke Marketing. It was something that a friend of mine back home told me about. I hadn't got a clue what he was talking about, his T-shirt. And he said, if you look, you can see the Wrangler logo. It's an image of Steve, the sort of expression and the look of it is based on him winning on that senior. And it shows you some of the logos on there of all those brands that was involved at the time. So to this day, 2024, and we're talking about 1992, and T-shirts are being produced to this. There apparently, for anybody out there, I must go and check it out. There's another one by Duke Marketing, and I think it says it's got an image of Steve on the Norton and Carl on his number 3 or 4, was it, on the Yamaha. And it says the greatest race ever. So to this day, the people are still, producing the T-shirts all these years later of that great race.
Well, legends are made on the mountain course, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah, and Steve Hislop certainly being one of them. What's it like being back now then? I mean, you gave a little bit of a kind of a sort of nod there to how different it is to when it was back then, but we've had a lot of drama and history made this weekend as well.
Yeah, yes, I must get my timings right, because it seems when I get involved, things seem to happen, and obviously with what's happening this week as well. No, look, listen, I love this place. To come over here as a guy of 21 on a little Suzuki 400, with my hair on my shoulders, and being very wet most of that week, but then to come back all those years later on business, I sometimes have to pinch myself, and now in 2024 to be back again and to see the way it's developed, it's been a massive part of my life, not from just a business perspective, but from a personal perspective.
I'm sure it has. And what are your plans this week?
To watch some racing. To catch up, I'd just like to give a big thank you to Linda and Matt, where they've very kindly given me some fantastic accommodation, and we're probably drinking a little bit too much beer and wine each evening to catch up, because it has been a while. No, for me, I've also been down to Port Erin last night and looked at tried to find a hotel that I stayed there in 81 called the Towers, but I'm very pleased to see that it sort of still exists in a way, because there's some apartments called the Towers, and somebody's informed me, but obviously they took the building went many years ago, and it's now some great looking apartments right up on the prom there. So for the rest of the week I'm going to catch up with a few other people. I will try and, I did promise I will try and contact Aaron and Connor, Steve's sons, and also Kelly, if she's around, which was Steve's old partner. So hopefully I'm going to make up for lost time.
And have you been to see the statue?
I'm going after this. It's really funny you should say that, because Linda, where I'm staying, she said, we were talking about this morning, and I was going to go yesterday, and I ended up in Port Erin, which was a little bit. So right after this interview, I'll be going up there. And again, I was over for when they did the unveiling. Steve's mum, Margaret, kindly invited me over, so I was over for that, and again, so it'd be so good to go back up there and probably take a can of beer and sit with my old mate and have a beer and look over Onken.
That's so lovely. 21 years since he's gone, and he is still missed today. Steve, it's been so lovely hearing your stories and memories of the other Steve, Steve Hislop. And thank you for sharing them with us. And I know this is a return to Manx Radio for you, because you did do an interview with us back in the day. Back in the day
with, I think, a certain Mr. Christopher Shaw.
I thought it might have been Chris.
Chris, if you're listening, I've still got the photograph, and I've still got that great image of you with that very, very dodgy haircut. So.
I think everyone had dodgy hair back then, it's only to be fair. Steve, thanks for sharing all your memories, and all the very best with the rest of your trip.
Cool. Many thanks. Thank you.
Keep up to date with Manx Radio's dedicated motorsport website, motorsport.manxradio.com, your one-stop shop for news, travel, road closures and racing schedules. You can also step into Manx Radio 1368's 60-year motorsport archive, including interviews with your favourite riders, race highlights from yesteryear, and our collection of motorsport videos and podcasts. motorsport.manxradio.com, the home for motorsport on the Isle of Man, from the best biking station in the world, Manx Radio 1368.